Welcome to Season 6 of the Art of Teaching podcast. I'm Matthew Green and I'm so glad that you joined me today. Before we get started with this week's interview, I wanted to say a quick thank you to all those that have subscribed, listened to and shared the episodes. If you get a chance, please take a few minutes to leave a review and comment on iTunes. It will help get the episodes to as many teachers as possible. Today I have another special episode of the Art of Teaching podcast. This time we'll be hearing from Adriano Di Prato, who is one of Australia's prominent educational thought leaders and an authority on curriculum, learning design and change management. He is the founding partner with A School for Tomorrow, which is a global education network that empowers students, teachers and school leaders in a rapidly changing world. His podcast, Game Changers, which he co-hosts with Phil Cummins, is a global phenomenon. Adriano was a wonderful guest, and I'm so thankful that he took the time to chat with me today. Adriano, welcome to the podcast. Thank you so much for taking the time to talk to me. I really appreciate it.
Well, thanks for inviting me. I feel very privileged, mate.
No problem. Whereabouts are you phoning in from?
I'm actually speaking to you from a glorious Melbourne, Australia.
Beautiful.
Now we finally recognised once again as the most livable city in the country. after 2 years of serious pain being locked down, but we seem to be slowly getting back and the city's come alive again. So although it's wintry and cold, the sun is shining and I'm excited to be here with you, mate.
Fantastic. Well, Melbourne is my second favourite city. I had the privilege of doing my master's down there at the University of Melbourne, and I really miss it. I really miss Melbourne. I think it's such a vibrant and such a beautiful city. Unfortunately, Sydney at the moment is pouring with rain, so I think we stole some of your weather, but looking forward to getting
I mean, you people can keep saying that it's our weather, but considering all the statistics and data suggests you have more rain than us. The other thing I'll say, Matt, we are entering into NAIDOC week, and I think it's an important opportunity for just us to stop and pause and recognise the traditional custodians of the land we stand on. In my context, it's the Wurundjeri people. And I've had the great pleasure of having to work with many of the elders over the years in the schools that I've been at to learn so much about their enduring and fascinating culture, thinking, their history. And of course, this week is a great celebration of what our First Nations people continue to bring to us as Australians in our community. And I hope that we can continue to elevate them more and more and recognise the contributions they make, not only in the past, the present, but of course in the future.
Fantastic. I couldn't agree more. I think it's so fitting to recognise such an important part of our history of this nation. So thank you so much for taking the time to acknowledge that. Quite possibly the most important question. What's your coffee order?
Well, this might actually shock some of your listeners and even you, Matt. And for someone like myself who's got a part Italian heritage, I'm actually not a big coffee drinker at all.
And you live in Melbourne.
I live in Melbourne, which is, and that's even more strange. But when pushed, I'd probably order a macchiato.
Okay, fantastic. Yeah. Is there a book that you've recently read that has caused you to stop and rethink everything? Could be professionally, could be personally.
Yeah. So, it's a good question. I love reading, so I read all the time. So I don't know if there's just one book that may have, made me stop or consider other things. But again, if I'm pressed, a bit like the coffee question, if I'm pressed, it's probably Brené Brown's Daring Greatly.
Yeah. A
book that really gives you permission. And I hope we discuss the word permission in our conversation today. It does give the individual the permission to step into the profound place of wonder and awe.
Wow.
And and know that vulnerability is a strength. So yeah, it's a book that definitely has resonated with me over the years.
Yeah.
It's actually a book that when I was at my previous school and I was the deputy head there, we would give that book to the newly appointed college captains.
Wow.
4 months before they officially started. So they were appointed the year before, they go through a process, and I would write a personal message in the front of the book, for all of them. And it was quite profound to watch them grow as young men and step into their own agency when they felt they had the permission to be simply themselves.
Fantastic. Wow. It's amazing. And if you could have a dinner party with anybody, who would be there? Obviously, your family get a free seat at the table.
Sure.
With anybody other than that?
I don't know if I'd want them there. No, I would.
We can edit that out. Yeah.
Well, can I have people who have passed?
Of course.
Okay, so the 5 people that I would want to have at this dinner party would be Pope Francis, Madonna,
wow,
William Barrack. For those who are not aware, William Barrack is in many ways to the Wurundjeri people their Martin Luther King.
Wow.
Maya Angelou.
Oh, amazing.
And of course, Jesus. Because there's over 2 billion people that worship the man and follow his message. And I wouldn't mind the opportunity to sit down and really understand what's the genesis of all of this, to use a pun from the Bible.
Yeah, fantastic.
Yeah. So that would be the people I reckon I'd have around. So it's a pretty eclectic mix. I don't know how Pope Francis and Jesus will go with Madonna, but let's have a crack.
Look, it would be a fascinating discussion, and I'd love an invite to that. I think it would be stories could be written about that evening.
Yeah.
What is something that you are grateful for from your parents?
I love this question, and thank you for asking it, Matt. I would say that they are models of the remarkable migrant story.
Wow.
And the value of a work ethic. And I suppose that's something that I greatly admire in them, and I'm eternally grateful about, because no doubt that work ethic is now part of my DNA.
Yeah.
But our federated Australia is a country that's been built on the strength of migrants from all parts of this world. And they have added to the rich fabric of that. And their example is one, and there are many examples, of migrant stories in Australia that have made massive contributions. But, theirs is one of after adversity, leaving their country of birth and setting out on a new adventure with an unknown, not knowing the language, food, culture, and all that, and making a good fist of it. So I think it's something to be celebrated.
Wow. Fantastic. I think that's such a common thread between that's come across with migrant families as well. Just that incredible gratitude for not only being in such a great country that we are, but also that determination and that grit and that perseverance to work really hard. I was born in the UK, as we talked about before we hit record. And I came over here with my father, and he reminded me all the time that we were in a country which was full of incredible opportunities, and not to waste it. And I think it's really important to remember that. Our 2 little girls are the first, if you like, proper Aussies in the family, the first ones that were born here. And so that's the conversations that we're having with them now, is just the incredible opportunity and the amazing privilege they have to be living in a country such as ours. So I'm really grateful that you would share that story. So what's your life like now? Like, what consumes most of your time? People that are not familiar with your work, obviously you've got a number of things going on, but how do you explain what you do to people when they meet you in the street or in the pub?
Well, it's interesting, Matt. I've got this aversion to small talk. In fact, I hate it.
Yeah.
And that's why I always think that I would never make a really good principal, because I've been a deputy head, and we all know, all the deputies listening to this, we all know that deputies run schools. But for me, small talk is something that has a superficiality about it that doesn't really sit comfortable with me. I rather get to the crux of it. So I could instantly answer that question by just reeling off what I do. But I'm sure we're going to kind of explore some of that in a more meaty way throughout this conversation.
Yeah.
But what consumes me is the interesting part of your question. I really love that. I love the way you phrase that. And for me, I kind of feel that today I'm actually in a transition phase personally.
Okay. Interesting.
That I'm absolutely loving the work that I'm doing with the School for Tomorrow, and of course with Game Changers, and building that audience and building that network, and really agitating for a new social contract in learning. But having said that, I'm a person that kind of never wants to stand still, and I feel that I'm on at the moment a bit of a journey to encounter whatever that next great adventure is going to be. So that's a very hard thing to explain to someone on a business card, or share with someone straight away.
Yeah.
But I feel that's what's consuming me at the moment is what's this next great adventure going to look like for me personally, but also for us as a society.
Yeah. And is that a feeling that you are familiar with? I mean, you mentioned that you worked as a deputy principal for many years, and now you're doing a number of other initiatives. But are you used to that feeling, or does it still slightly terrify you?
It's interesting. It's another great question, because I've entered now into a space that is very unfamiliar to me, and it's the kind of edupreneur space or entrepreneurial space, right?
Yeah.
Prior to that, I was in schools for 26 plus years, where I was remunerated based on an award structure. There was security about that was really assuring. There was leave entitlements, there was personal leave entitlements. There's all those things that come with employment as part of a system that really attempts to support its employees in the best way that it sees fit at that time. And so now I'm in a space that is truly about iteration of the product, but it's also about iteration of the person. And so are there days, I wouldn't use the word terrify. I think that would be a bit extreme for me. I would say that there are days where there's definitely imposter syndrome, and that is very unfamiliar for me.
Wow.
I don't want to sound arrogant, but I was confident about my capacity as an educator and a teacher.
Yes,
and with the breadth of experience that I've had, that confidence has come part of the currency that I've developed. But yeah, now it's a new space. And things that I'm familiar with creating narratives. I'm familiar with the mission about why. But entering into a sales context is totally foreign to me. It's not something that sales from a business vernacular is not something that has been I've ever had to worry about. So at the age of 50, I'm relearning, and I kind of it doesn't terrify me. It can be exhausting, but at most of the times, it's absolutely exhilarating.
Wow. Fantastic. Yeah. And I think, gosh, there's so much in there, and thank you so much for your generosity and your openness with that. And I don't know if this is a properly formulated question, but or more of a statement, but I really struggle with that. I mean, I have my parents are both working class, and they've really worked hard their entire life, and this idea of a safe, secure job and teaching offers you that is something which you should be incredibly grateful for. And so I don't know if you can relate to this at all, but I sort of struggle with that. I almost feel that if I was to walk away from teaching, there would be a feeling of being ungrateful or not appreciating what we have with that stability. But I also am very aware of that feeling, that niggling, that there is something more kind of percolating. Is that something which you can relate to, or do you have any, it's like a therapy session, or do you have any advice for someone who is also considering that change?
I still wrestle with the fact that I've given up financial stability. And that has to be a real consideration in anyone's kind of life when you are supporting yourself, your family, and so many others. And we saw the impact of people's financial security being impacted during COVID when jobs were lost. So there was this real kind of financial psychology that's going on that can really impact upon people's health. So anyone that wants to embark on this, I was not prepared for what that might feel like.
Yeah.
Fortunately, I was always very clever with my savings and my investments, and I was able to, create a really good, solid foundation of finances so that I could lean on. But it's using a lot of money now to make a lot of investment into something that's still an idea. So there is a wrestling. There's definitely a wrestling, Matt, because just like you, I grew up with working class parents as well. And the value of the dollar and the appreciation of the job you have was something that was real and is real, and has great value. But I also feel that I would be disingenuous if I actually stood in front of a class and said to young people and the adults that support them in schools, you've got to be this continuous learner and unlearner. And if I then didn't lean into that,
couldn't agree more.
Am I really living my truth then?
Yeah.
So I'm now testing it, and you never know, I might end up back in a school.
Wow. Look, I think that is, you raised so many important points in that, and you're exactly right. I think we need to practice what we preach. Because if we're talking about taking beautiful risks and we're teaching them to children and talking about the importance of trusting our gut and going with instinct, but we're not willing to do that, I think there's a level of hypocrisy there. So I applaud you for your bravery. And I'm sure in many years' time, I'll be giving you a call and having a bit of a crisis and asking you what my next step should be. But really appreciate it. But just moving on slightly, the Game Changers podcast, there's one podcaster to another. Why did you want to start a podcast, and why is it a medium which you have invested a significant amount of yourself into? Because you have a number of episodes with some really world-class educators. But why invest so much into a podcast?
Well, I think many people have now heard the story about why, but I'll be very happy to share it with your listeners. And I received a call back in early 2020. So it was a year that I had decided that it was going to be a sabbatical year, and I actually wasn't going to do anything except lie on a beach in Sicily and tan myself like a chicken on a rotisserie. Anyway, so in 2020, I got a phone call from Dr. Phil Cummins, who's the co-host of Game Changers, and he asked if I wanted to create a podcast, and I said sure, as long as it's about changing the game of school, and we call it Game Changers. So we agreed. And then since then, we curated our first series really, really quickly, drawing on our own contacts in education and in industry. And through that process, we met obviously many new people as well that we don't know in that process. So now we've created over 10 series. We've got over 150 episodes. We've had 150 plus guests. And we're listened to in 6 continents.
Amazing.
If someone out there is listening to it in Antarctica, I'm quite happy to make it 7 continents. And we're closing in on the 300,000 listeners on a regular basis. So that's been the success of what we've done. So clearly there's an audience, clearly there's an appetite, and it's the audience and their appetite for better practice, not best practice, better practice, and a kind of new learning ecosystem that drives us forward. And for me, podcasts, Matt, are a terrific medium. Podcasts cost little for the listener, apart from their time.
Yeah.
And so many of our listeners tell us that they listen to our show in their commute to work, or going home at the end of the day, or while they're at the gym, or while they're walking, or doing other things. And for us, the podcast allows for a greater audience, irrespective of their circumstance. I feel there's a quality about podcasts as well, and it gives them access in terms of our show to educational thinking in support of their own personal growth, but also their professional growth and practice. And we don't believe that we should just be having conversations with educators at Game Changers. We believe that industry and business leaders and community leaders all have significant contributions to make to the shape and formation of schooling and education going forward. Because many of those other things that I've just mentioned are the organisations that are eventually going to hire the young people that we're developing. And these people are at the cutting edge of what's happening in the world of work, in what's happening in society around social impact change and not-for-profits and those type of things. So, and so if we can introduce some of these thinkers, we call them, the brave pioneers that don't wait for permission. If we can do that on a more regular basis, then our listeners are richer for that experience.
Yeah. I couldn't agree more. And this comes back to what we were talking about before, about how important it is for you as the host of this incredible platform to actually be brave pioneers and game changers in education yourself, and actually taking on uncharted territory, even though it may be a little bit daunting at times. I'm just curious, was there a teacher that really made a difference in your life? Is there a teacher that that really impacted you when you were a kid?
Again, it's a bit like the book. I don't know if it's just been one. I've had some remarkably horrible teachers.
Same, yeah.
That I learned a lot about how not to behave.
Yeah.
But I've also had the real privilege of encountering people who are deeply passionate about what they do. They care about young people and each other. And I remember my grade, it's either grade 5 or grade 6 primary school teacher. His name is Justin Madden, and many of the Australian listeners will know that name instantly because he was the Minister of Planning or wasn't educator, planning or something eventually with the Victorian government. But he's more famously known, of course, for being a premiership captain for the Carlton Football Club, playing over 300 games. And here was a bloke who was 6'9".
Wow.
And I'm not short, I'm 6'2", but I wasn't 6'2" in primary school, right? I was a little kid. And so we're all little. And I remember Justin being this giant. And at the time he was playing for Essendon, and there was all this talk about him being recruited either the Hawthorn or Carlton. And of course, we're all in his ear saying, you've got to go to Carlton because we're all Carlton supporters. But what I remembered was that he was this giant of a man, but he would always sit down so that he could have eye level with these little kids.
Wow.
And what struck me when I reflect upon that moment with Justin was he didn't have to do that, but he had to do that. Because he was deeply conscious that his size might intimidate, his height might intimidate, and he didn't want to make little kids, young people, impressionable young people feel in any way inferior. And the gesture of just sitting down, and the poor bloke would have to sit on those little chairs sometimes in classrooms, and there's this giant, so that he would be at your eye level, so he would meet you where you're at.
Wow. And
I think there's something profound about that has always stuck with me throughout my entire career. Meet people where they're at.
Wow. I think that's so important. And it's so interesting. Everyone has a story of a great teacher. And also everyone has a story or stories, unfortunately, of teachers that haven't been great. Do you think, how do you think your experience in Justin's class has shaped the way that you approach teaching and learning at the moment, or has impacted your career?
Look, I reckon along my educational journey, I made lots of mistakes in those formative years, thinking initially that teaching was about command and control.
Yeah.
Because Justin was an outlier. The majority of people I then started working alongside of, or the majority of the people that taught me, were all about control and compliance.
Yeah.
So, you're hardwired to a system and you learn a particular way.
Yeah.
And you don't really know any different. So those outliers then stood out, but I didn't know why they stood out until now. Yeah. And then I started realizing that the drill and kill, the sit and get, the do as I say approach is serving no one.
No.
Well, it's serving order. It's serving order.
Yeah.
But order is not compliance.
Yeah.
Sorry. Order is not engagement, and so it serves that very well. And, people like well-ordered things in Anglo societies, right? Everyone lines up and they wait patiently. and everything's kind of controlled and ordered and it's everything proper. But that's just not how the world works. Yeah. The world's not that linear. The world is messy. The world is complicated. The world is confusing at times. Yeah. I'm not suggesting I'm advocating for anarchy in a classroom context or a free-for-all. But when we move away from the control of compliance and risk aversion, and we move into the profound space of permission, where we're empowering young people to really step into their own agency, there's a different transformation that happens.
Yeah, absolutely.
One comes from the construct of fear. One is born from the construct of love.
Yeah.
And so I would say that the majority of the back end of my teaching career adopted the concept of love, and how do we create environments that are safe, that young people understand their responsibility to each other and how to be welcoming and how to be respectful and all those right relationships. They're standards that should be creating culture, that should create really good habits, not dismissing the value of those. But how we do that is really important in a learning context.
Yeah.
And if we do it from a deficit approach, well, we're asking them to punch down.
Yeah.
If we approach it from an empowerment context or a restorative context, a learning context, because they're under construction, then we're aspirational and we're punching up. And that's where I'd rather be.
Yeah, absolutely. Look, I couldn't agree more. And before we move on to your work with A School for Tomorrow, I just wanted to talk a little bit about change and the messiness of change. And I wanted to ask you, in terms of a school context, why is change so hard? I mean, we know what we need to do as educators, but for some reason we don't do it. Is it because it's easier to stick with what we know? Or explain a little bit, if you wouldn't mind, just about the messiness of change, and how do we embrace change as educators?
I think from everything that I've experienced in schools, the one thing that is really obvious to me is why change is so difficult.
Yeah.
Is that for individuals, I believe it's about their fear of being irrelevant.
Wow.
And then, of course, there are systems that don't shift or change, because it's exactly what you said a moment ago, and that's about this is how we've always done things philosophy. So there is the other element is that there is this enduring legacy piece, that often holds us to ransom, that often is crippling, and people can't see that because sometimes they attach the legacy to tradition and things that we value or things that are great. And I'm not suggesting that those enduring qualities that make up schools or learning communities should be just thrown out, because there are many enduring traditions that have value. But don't weaponize your resistance to change because you're holding on to a tradition that is no longer going to serve the next generation of individuals. It might serve you, but it won't serve these young people, because their world is they're living in a very different context now and will be tomorrow than what we are. And our responsibility has to be less about ourselves, and we need to park our bloody egos and focus on an ecosystem that acknowledges that the young people in our care should be at the center of our thinking and our decision making, and we should be heroing what they need. And to do that, we need to do that in partnership with them. Yeah. At different times of their journey, that part of that change process for a young person is, at one point they're dependent upon us, but at some point they're no longer dependent upon us. These young people are going through their own transformation.
Yeah.
We should be these kind of organic systems that are open to our own transformation as well, and how we do that, is crucial. I mean, I think about that resistance that they're going to have about being relevant. Yeah.
Yeah.
And the first step, I feel, to overcoming that, well, I don't know if we can fully overcome it, because if they feel it, it's real. Whether it's real or perceived, it's real in their mind. Yeah.
Exactly.
But when we commence any kind of change process, I like to always encourage, well, I did this, and I like to encourage leaders that we support through our work with the School for Tomorrow to enter into the profound space of listening, to understand, not simply to respond. Yeah. Then once you have gone through a process of listening, and I'm talking real active listening, no judgment, just listening, and you're listening, you're observing, and you're collecting data so that you're getting a fuller picture and understanding of what the inherent needs are. When you already know that the world is changing, that we've got these mega trends that are influencing the way schooling and society are going to operate and function, and how young people are going to live, and how we're currently living, that's evolving all the time. We've just come out of, well, we're still in a pandemic in many ways, but, we've come out some of the extreme elements of that, and we've had to adjust and adapt. And so we've got to go on this listening tour as part of change. We've got to really understand our people, because they matter. People make schools, they matter. But then once we've gone on this listening tour, then we have to enter into kind of the space of defining the case for change in a manner that maps out a way forward that attends to the needs of the people, but the places we're serving, and ultimately our planet. Trust and transparency are crucial components to that. Relationships only happen at the speed of trust. And then after we've gone through this kind of listening or empathy stage, and we've entered into a defining stage, we then enter into the stage of an iteration process, checking in using frequent feedback loops, and strong and frequent communication is part of the normal practice. We then test that through prototyping. We test our models, we test our ideas in the local context, we refine it, and then we adapt where necessary. And for me, then the final thing I'll say about change is this. And I've got a little quote that I sourced in preparation of our conversation today. And that is that we have to understand that change, or as I prefer it, transformation, is a natural part of human evolution, right?
Absolutely.
So we have to accept that. We've got to also accept that we're part of this planet. So we've got to stop living as if we exist separately from it. So when are we going to start realizing that our world continues to evolve? I mean, we live in a world where we have 4 seasons a year. Each year has a transition that goes on, right? It's happening all around us. So it's almost like it's this regeneration piece that occurs naturally, and we're part of nature. We're part of this world. So we have to be conscious that change is real. And so I've got this quote here from Sir Ken Robinson, which many people, of course, will be very familiar with. This is from his book, The Element, How Finding Your Passion Changes Everything. And he said this: the fact is that given the challenges we face, education doesn't need to be reformed. It needs to be transformed. The key is this transformation is not to standardize education, but to personalize it, to build achievement on discovering the individual talents of each child, to put students in an environment where they want to learn and where they can naturally discover their true passions. I kind of feel that many educations felt instinctively that Robinson was right 2 decades ago when he first mentioned this, or his TED talk. But what we now know is that this act of transformation never stops. We don't do it once. We do it all the time by enlisting in the voice, the agency, and the advocacy of our young people, our staff, their families, and the broader community to kind of build character, competency, wellness for young people to thrive. If I think about farmers, farmers are just remarkable humans in my eyes. What they are able to do with the natural environment to not only feed their families but create produce for all of us is just brilliant. They help us sustain our world. They are so committed. So many farmers are so committed to a sustainable environment, for instance, that if I'm an orchid farmer, how I tend to that orchid is completely different with its soil and taking that produce than I would be an olive grower. And again, how it would be different to tomatoes or pumpkins. They understand what personalization means for those different entities on the vegetable spectrum or the fruit spectrum, right? They personalize it to maximize the opportunity and the yield while sustaining the foundations of their soil. So the yield comes back again and the yield comes back again, right? And so they get it. Transformation is happening all the time. I think part of our challenge about this fear of being irrelevant is, do we have the capacity? And it goes to your question earlier about being possibly terrified about leaving a stable job and entering into a space that isn't secure. Can you imagine if we actually lived in a world where playing and living in uncertainty was the norm?
Yeah, it'd be amazing. Terrifying.
And if we built our capacity of our young people, instead of hardwiring them out an industrial model that served a purpose successfully for a very long time, but if we went down a path where we helped them develop the self-efficacy, the emotional competency, and the adaptability skills, or the enterprise skills, that when we do enter into this constant state of uncertainty, because I think that's going to be our norm now, we're going to continue to thrive.
Yeah.
We're not going to perish.
Yeah.
And so, yes, we can go through really good change management processes. Yes, we can think about adopting even a design thinking kind of methodology. That's kind of what I just shared about that process a moment ago, about the listening and the defining an iteration and testing model. But we also have to start changing our relationship with failure. And we need to start thinking about that mistakes can be markers of the learning process. And that we also need to start thinking that no one is irrelevant. Everyone makes a contribution. Everyone's voice matters. We've got to create a paradigm where we're tapping into that richness that we have in front of us, so that everyone can thrive, as opposed to only listening to a small few who think they might have all the answers.
Yeah, absolutely. I couldn't agree more. And what a lovely transition into the work that you're doing for A School for Tomorrow, talking about a new approach to education. And would you mind maybe just unpacking what A School for Tomorrow is, and what are some of the things that you're trying to do in that very significant space?
Okay, so A School for Tomorrow is a global network that supports students, teachers, school leaders, and school teams to basically thrive in today's world. That's the pitch. And we have one goal, and that's about creating today's learning for tomorrow's world. We do that through the lens of promoting 6 graduate outcomes, but under 4 buckets of learn, live, lead, and work. And we want to animate those through developing a toolkit around knowledge, skills, dispositions, which is a kind of character formation piece, and habits. And the habit is about developing a reflective habit of a deep tuning in and clearly understanding what your inherent purpose is, and then how then you can use that purpose, of course, through your own self-actualization to support the growth of others around you. And the value we see in a global network is we're simply better together. Right? We have a collective wisdom that can support an evolution in schooling and society, and this broad church of people and ideas, heroes, that diversity is our strength, and that's something that we want to continue to really push as we go forward at A School for Tomorrow. At a practical level, for those listening, we're like an educational consultancy company. So I'll park the word salad for a second. I'll get to the nuts and bolts of what we do. We offer lots of support and opportunity around strategic education development programs, everything from strategic planning to governance to curriculum design to entrepreneurship to issues in relation to Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander education. We look at, of course, we hero wellbeing at the centre of a lot of what we do. And so we look at all those type of practical things that schools need today in aligning themselves to curriculum and animating it in a way that's going to be really user-friendly going forward for enterprise. We have a research body called Circle as part of our organisation. So they do extensive research with school networks, particularly around character education and really understanding what that looks like and doing audits. And then we have these thriving survey tools. And these thriving survey tools are a bit of an audit that we can do to give you a living snapshot of where your school is at any given time. Nice. And they are really powerful survey tools that provide students, teachers, school leaders a really good definition around whether they're thriving or not. Yeah. And the last piece is that we have an online platform. We've got 1,500 people on it at the moment from across the globe. who are all, collaborating in that particular space. There are some spaces that are closed where schools have got their own private space on there as well. So they can do short courses that we offer. They can attend events that we offer. And then, of course, we produce a podcast called Game Changers.
Amazing. Well, I'll put all of that information in our show notes so people can stay in touch and see some of the amazing work that you're doing. And for those people that are listening, I would highly recommend the Game Changers podcast. It has got me through countless hours of Sydney traffic each morning. So please do check that out. And Adriano, I just wanted to loop back to a word that you shared that you wanted to talk about, which was permission. Why did you want to spend a few moments talking about that? Why is that important?
Okay. Why do I want to talk about permission? Okay. So this is what I kind of believe, right? I believe that in each person or each individual has inherent greatness within them. That's something that I believe.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, only a minority ever procure this gift.
Yeah.
And actually share it with the world. Often, fear of failure, issues of self-worth, being a victim of circumstance, not enough time, or the judgment of others, blah, 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 whatever it is, prevents people from truly pursuing their passion and their purpose in life. All these, I won't call them excuses, but these things contribute to kind of cultivating a fixed mindset, where people are forever settling around safe, predictable, and comfortable.
Yeah.
For me, the power in the word permission is the granting of oneself the formal consent to simply do something. It's this necessary yes, right, towards real movement, purposeful action, and self-actualization.
Wow.
So when we say that our game changers are the brave pioneers that don't wait for permission, is there a maverick element to that? Probably. But, change has happened in our world when people have been prepared to stand up against the status quo and challenge binary thinking, and challenge the predictable, the comfortable, the safe.
Yeah.
But those things have a place in our psychology. Of course they do.
Yeah.
But when it comes to leaders, people who are driving us forward, leading learning communities. I mean, education is the third largest export in our country behind iron ore and coal.
Gosh.
So the top three exports, two of them represent the past, one represents the future. And we've got leaders and systems driving these places, and their modus operandi is safe, predictable, and comfortable. Well, the only safe element should be around child protection and the inherent dignity of everyone in that community. The predictability, of course, creates a good environment, and it should be comfortable. But they shouldn't be the only markers. They should be the basic standards. But they shouldn't be what we measure success on. When are we going to start measuring movement? When are we going to start measuring purposeful, intentional action going forward and self-actualization? When are we going to start heroing that people are saying yes to themselves? So they're giving themselves, so like I keep saying, permission is the formal consent to say yes to yourself. And then once you have entered into the profound place of your own truth and you've accepted that, you can be so much more for others.
Yeah, wow.
And that's what with the type of leaders that we want to keep interviewing on Game Changers. People in their industry or in education or in not-for-profit who are saying, we're not waiting for permission anymore because we're giving ourselves permission and the consent to step into our own yes and do something.
Amazing. I couldn't agree more. It's given me goosebumps, I think, to hear about the just the possibility of that word and what that could mean for future generations and educators. And it's so significant. A couple of questions before we close. I do want to be, like I said, respectful of your time. But what do you want your legacy to be in this space? It could be corporately or it could be more personally, but what sort of mark would you like to leave in this space?
Truthfully, Matt, I think that's for others to determine.
Yeah. Great answer. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, I'll leave it at that.
Fantastic. And final question. Where can we find out more about you? How can people follow the amazing work that you're engaged in?
Well, thank you for calling that amazing work. I just think it's work that's needed and significant and necessary. And I'm not alone in this, by the way. There's a movement at foot. There's lots of people across the globe who are recognizing an inherent need to change and to continue to evolve, so that our children don't become the collateral damage for our reluctance to simply transform our systems. Yeah. So you want to discover more, obviously you can head over to aschoolfortomorrow.com and discover more about the work that we do at School for Tomorrow. Or you can just simply head over to LinkedIn and search for me on there, connect and say good day.
Fantastic. Well, as I mentioned, I'll make sure I put in all of the show notes, all of the resources so that people can stay in touch with you. But Adriano, I'm so grateful, and I think that I know that the success of this podcast is due to the generosity of people like yourself that would be willing to spend an hour or so and talk to me. So hugely grateful, and it's a massive privilege to finally get to interview you. So thank you for what you're doing, and thank you for being one of those individuals that is not afraid to try things and not afraid to put your neck out and make a difference in our incredible profession. So from the bottom of my heart, thank you for everything that you're doing, and I'm looking forward to seeing more and following your work in the future. So thank you so much.
Thanks very much, Matt. It's been a great conversation. Appreciate it.
Thank you for taking the time to listen to the Art of Teaching podcast today. I hope that you, like me, got some valuable insights out of our discussion. For show notes, please visit theartofteachingpodcast.com. I've one favour to ask. If you could please head to the iTunes page of the podcast and rate and review the episode. This would really help to get the interviews and resources to as many people as possible. Also, I've created a private Facebook group so that we can continue the discussion after each episode. The link is in the show notes. Thank you again for listening, and until next time,